The flight cabin was supposed to be quiet. Instead, her voice cracked through it like a whip. "Get out. You don't belong in first class." The words hit harder than turbulence. Passengers froze, forks paused above trays, eyes darting toward the aisle where one woman in a navy blazer stood with fury burning off her face. The flight attendant wasn't whispering. She wanted the entire cabin to hear. Her finger jabbed the air as if it could erase a man from the seat he'd rightfully paid for. That man, Marcus Carter, didn't flinch. He sat still in seat 2 amperes, posture relaxed, gaze calm, dressed down in a plain black t-shirt and dark jeans. No Rolex, no tie, no suit. To her, he looked like an intruder. To him, this was familiar. Behind her, the captain arrived, arms folded, jaw locked. Authority was stacking up in uniform against one passenger who hadn't moved a muscle. And further back, 2 security officers hovered near the curtain, their presence a silent threat. But the cabin had more eyes than uniforms. A young blonde woman in row 3 had already lifted her phone, recording, her screen glowing like a spotlight. Across the aisle, a businessman lowered his newspaper just enough to watch. Murmurs rippled through the seats, soft but sharp. "What's happening? Why him?" Marcus remained motionless. His silence was its own defiance. He'd seen this play before in banks, in hotels, in boardrooms. Same script, new stage. He didn't need to speak yet. The flight attendant leaned closer, her voice slicing the air. "Sir, comply or we'll remove you. People like you don't get seats like this." A gasp rolled down the cabin. The captain's expression tightened, but he said nothing. The security officers stepped 1 pace closer. Marcus finally moved, not to argue, not to defend himself. He simply shifted his gaze, slow and steady, like an anchor settling deeper into the ocean floor. His calm was louder than her outrage, and that's where the story begins. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now back to Marcus. He sat there, quiet, letting the storm gather around him. The accusations, the uniforms, the cameras. He let it build, because he knew what they didn't. Storms always break, and when this one did, it wouldn't be him swept away. Marcus Carter didn't look like power. That was the point. He chose the plain black t-shirt, the dark jeans, the worn leather sneakers. He wanted to see how his own airline treated someone who didn't match the glossy ads, who didn't drip status in designer labels. To the flight attendant, he looked disposable. To the captain, he looked like a nuisance. To most of the cabin, he looked like a man sitting in the wrong seat. But Marcus knew better. He had built too much, endured too much, to be shaken by appearances. He sat still, hands resting loosely on his knees, every breath measured. The cabin's recycled air hummed through the vents, carrying whispers like static. A boy in row 5 asked his mother why the man couldn't stay in his chair. The mother shushed him quickly, glancing nervously at the uniforms closing in. Marcus remembered another chair, decades earlier, in a regional airline interview room. He was 25, suit-pressed, resume thick with degrees. The manager had looked him over and said, "Not the image we're looking for." He'd walked out that day branded invisible. That rejection had fueled every deal, every stake he'd built, until he owned more of the industry than men like that manager could dream of. Now, years later, the same script played again. Different stage, same insult. You don't belong. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as boarding continued. Luggage wheels thumped into overhead bins. But all eyes kept drifting back to 2 amperes, where one man's quiet presence clashed with the crew's rising hostility. The attendant snapped her fingers toward him. "Sir, I said move. Don't make this harder." Marcus didn't answer. His silence pressed against her words like a wall. His calm wasn't weakness. It was preparation. He had no reason to argue. The truth always revealed itself, given enough time. A young trainee, barely out of uniform training, stood frozen near the galley. Her eyes darted from the torn boarding pass to Marcus's still face. She bit her lip, thumb hovering over her phone. She knew what she saw wasn't right, but protocol said silence. Meanwhile, 2 passengers in row 3 exchanged a look. One mouthed, "Record this." The other nodded, angling a phone lower, capturing every gesture, every word. Marcus shifted slightly, adjusting in his seat. Not nervous, not restless, anchored. He let the room tell on itself. Every insult, Every order barked, every sideways glance was proof piling up against them. To him, this wasn't just a flight. It was a mirror, and he knew mirrors never lie. The aisle became a stage. Every step of the crew made it smaller, tighter, harder to breathe. The captain moved first, his shoes clicking against the floor as he came closer. Arms folded across his chest, jaw set like stone. He positioned himself behind the flight attendant as if her words had already become his verdict. "Sir," he said evenly, "comply or we'll have you escorted off." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command, the kind that made lesser men shrink. Marcus didn't shrink. He didn't even blink. The attendant, emboldened, leaned closer. "Economy's back there. That's more your style." The words weren't procedure. They were poison. A few rows back, passengers stirred. A businessman lowered his phone to whisper, "That doesn't sound right." A young woman pressed her lips together, shaking her head. In row 3, the faint glow of a camera light reflected off the window as someone hit record. The first officer appeared now, summoned by the tension, and joined the cluster at Marcus's seat. Uniform after uniform, authority piling up like storm clouds. What had been one woman's disdain was now an entire chain of command aimed at one silent man. The young trainee near the galley gripped her notepad tighter, knuckles white. She had been told to observe, not interfere. But her eyes betrayed her conscience. She had scanned his ticket herself. It flashed green. She knew. And yet, here she stood, watching lies dress themselves up as protocol. The attendant snapped her fingers again, sharp like a slap. "Sir, don't make this harder. People like you don't just walk into first class." That phrase, "people like you," cut the cabin deeper than any security threat. A mother in row 5 pulled her child closer. An older man near the window frowned, whispering, "That's not company policy." Phones rose higher now, red lights blinking. The room was recording itself. Marcus finally lifted his head, his eyes sweeping the faces before him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The stillness of his gaze made the uniforms shift uneasily, as if they had pressed too far into something they didn't understand. And then came the escalation that tipped the balance. One of the security officers stepped forward, hand brushing the radio on his belt. "Sir, final warning. Stand up or you'll be removed." The passengers went silent. Engines hummed below, the only sound louder than the silence between words. Marcus exhaled slowly, shoulders steady. He remained seated. The storm was gathering, and he knew storms only break one way, loud, destructive, and undeniable. Marcus didn't rise. He didn't argue. He simply sat, the way an anchor settles deeper when the tide pushes hardest. His hands rested lightly on the armrests, fingers relaxed, no twitch, no fidget. His eyes fixed on a single point ahead, steady, unyielding. The chaos around him only made his stillness louder. The captain shifted, clearing his throat as though silence unnerved him more than defiance. The attendant snapped her fingers again, desperate to provoke a reaction. "Sir, did you hear me? Move!" Her voice wavered for the first time, thin under the weight of her own words. Passengers leaned in closer. One man whispered, "Why isn't he saying anything?" Another replied, "Because he doesn't have to." The phone stayed up, recording a silence that was heavier than shouting. The young trainee lingered near the galley door, eyes wide. She remembered the green light on the scanner when his ticket cleared. She wanted to speak, but her training pinned her tongue. Protocol said, "Trust the senior crew." Conscience said otherwise. Her thumb brushed against her phone in her pocket, hovering over the record button, trembling with indecision. Marcus breathed slowly, drawing in the stale cabin air as if it were oxygen for patience. He remembered another room, another silence 20 years earlier in a downtown bank lobby. He had been asked to wait while his check was verified. He waited hours, calm on the outside, burning on the inside, until the manager admitted they had flagged him for no reason except suspicion written on his skin. That day, he learned the power of silence. It revealed more than shouting ever could. Now, seated in 2 amperes, that lesson returned. Every extra second of stillness forced the crew to reveal themselves. Their tone sharpened, their language slipped, their authority cracked. The first officer leaned down, speaking through clenched teeth. "You're holding up the flight. Stop playing games." Marcus turned his head slowly, eyes meeting his. He said nothing. Just the faintest lift of an eyebrow, a question unsaid. Whose game? Phones caught it. A dozen little red lights blinked like witnesses. The silence had become performance, and Marcus was directing it without a word. The attendant scoffed, stepping back as if retreating from a wall she couldn't break. "He's not cooperating," she muttered to the captain. The words were shaky, defensive. She didn't sound in control anymore, she sounded afraid of losing it. Marcus remained seated, still, unbothered. The storm was theirs, not his. The cabin was no longer just crew versus one man. Other voices began to rise, small at first, then sharper. Row 3. A woman in a red sweater whispered to her seatmate, "He showed them his ticket. Why are they still pushing?" Her companion shook his head, sliding his phone up, camera angled just over the tray table. Row 5. A teenage boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "He didn't do anything, Mom." The mother, hesitant, hushed him quickly, but her own eyes stayed locked on Marcus, watching. And in the galley, the trainee's conscience cracked. She pulled her phone from her pocket, thumb-tapping the voice recorder. She didn't raise it, didn't make a show, but the faint red circle glowed against her palm. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. She stepped half a pace forward, breath caught in her throat. "I scanned his ticket," she said softly. Not loud, not yet, but enough. The captain turned sharply, narrowing his eyes. "Mia, that's not your place." His tone was firm, cutting. "Stay out of it." But the damage was done. 2 passengers nearby caught the words. "She said his ticket scanned," one murmured, angling his phone higher. The flight attendant hissed, frustrated. "Don't listen to her. She's new. She doesn't understand protocol." Mia's jaw tightened. Her voice came again, a little louder now, carried by nerves and conviction. "It scanned green. I know what I saw." The tension shifted, like air sucked out before thunder breaks. A man in row 2, 2 seats behind Marcus, leaned into the aisle. "She said his ticket's valid. Why are you still harassing him?" He wasn't recording. He wasn't whispering. His words rang clear enough to make the cabin hum. The attendant's face flushed. "Sir, remain seated." But he didn't. He stayed half-turned, eyes fixed on Marcus, nodding once as if to say, "We see you." Phones everywhere tilted higher, dozens of tiny spotlights collecting proof. Marcus still hadn't spoken. His silence drew allies the way gravity pulls tides. His calm was louder than their threats. The captain rubbed his temple, muttering something to the first officer. The security guard shifted again, uncomfortable under the weight of so many watching eyes. The cabin was no longer neutral. Witnesses had taken sides. And for the first time, the crew looked smaller than the man they were trying to erase. The hum of the engines seemed to fade beneath the sharpness of raised voices. Authority doubled down. The captain stepped closer, his shadow cutting across Marcus's seat. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone heavy with forced patience. "This is your final opportunity to move. If you refuse, we'll have security escort you off." Each word was delivered like a sentence already signed. Beside him, the flight attendant folded her arms, her lips curled in a half-smile that wasn't professional, it was personal. "Honestly," she sneered, "do you think we can't tell when someone doesn't belong? This cabin is reserved for real first-class passengers." The words rippled through the aisle. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, others froze mid-sip. Phones caught everything. From row 3, a man muttered just loud enough for others to hear, "He's sitting in the seat he paid for. This is insane." His comment spread like a spark. Heads nodded, murmurs rolled. The tide of the cabin was turning, but the crew didn't notice, or refused to. The first officer joined now, his presence making the knot of uniforms feel like a wall. He leaned down, inches from Marcus's face. "You're delaying our departure. Do you want to end up on a no-fly list?" His voice was low, almost taunting. Marcus didn't move. He didn't speak. His eyes stayed calm, unblinking. That silence cut deeper than protest. It made the officer's jaw twitch, the attendant's breath quicken. They wanted a scene. He gave them none. Then came the escalation that drew audible gasps. The attendant snatched Marcus's boarding pass from the seat pocket, holding the torn edges up like evidence. "Fraud," she spat. "That's what this island." Phones snapped higher. Passengers whispered fiercely now, words like "unbelievable" and "record this" floated through the air. Mia, the trainee, trembled but spoke again, louder this time. "It's scanned valid. I checked it myself." Her voice cracked, but it carried. The captain turned, face red. "Enough. You're out of line." But Mia didn't shrink. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. What's out of line is calling him a fraud when the system cleared his ticket. The cabin exhaled a wave of disbelief, of courage borrowed from one young voice. The attendant's face hardened, but her eyes darted toward the cameras, toward the passengers no longer passive. Control was slipping, and she knew it. Marcus sat through it all, unmoving. Calm wasn't his defense, it was his weapon. The snap of paper tearing was sharper than the engines outside. The flight attendant ripped what was left of Marcus's boarding pass straight down the middle and let the pieces fall to the floor like trash. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A woman clutched her pearls. Someone whispered, "Did she really just do that?" The attendant's voice rose, pitched with triumph. "This proves it. He doesn't belong here. Fraudule ticket, fraudule passenger." One of the security officers stepped forward, hand gripping the strap of his radio. "Sir, stand up. You're coming with us." But Marcus stayed seated, posture steady, eyes unreadable, phones tilted higher. The glow of recording screens dotted the cabin like stars in a midnight sky. Every gesture, every insult was being logged in real time. The captain's patience snapped. "Remove him now," he barked. His voice carried the force of authority, but it cracked at the edges. Mia, the trainee, broke formation completely. She stepped into the aisle, hands trembling but voice rising. "You can't do this. His ticket scanned green, I saw it." The attendant whipped around, eyes blazing. "Quiet, Mia. You're on probation. One more word and you'll be written up." But Mia didn't back down. Her chin lifted, her voice stronger. "Then write me up, but I won't lie for you." A murmur surged through the passengers, emboldened. A man in row 2 raised his voice. "She's right. You're targeting him. We're all seeing this." The security officer hesitated, his grip loosening. The weight of the room pressed against him. Marcus remained still, hands folded lightly, gaze level. He didn't defend himself. He didn't need to. The cabin was doing it for him. The attendant, red-faced and desperate, tried again. "Sir, you're under investigation. You've disrupted this flight. You'll be detained." Her words fell flat. They no longer sounded like policy, they sounded like panic. A passenger near the back called out, "Detained for what? Sitting in his seat?" Laughter, bitter and sharp, followed. The pieces of paper on the floor fluttered with the airflow of the vents, evidence of a humiliation that had just crossed into spectacle. Marcus drew one slow breath, steady as stone. The storm had peaked, and he was still the only one not moving. The torn boarding pass still lay scattered at his feet, but Marcus finally moved. Not to rise, not to argue. Just enough to slip a phone from his pocket, the matte black surface gleaming under the cabin lights. He unlocked it with one smooth swipe and pressed a single button. "Rachel," he said calmly, his voice so even it silenced the rowdiest murmurs. "Initiate protocol. Notify the board." The words weren't loud, but they landed like thunder. Passengers leaned forward. "The board?" someone whispered. On the other end of the call, Rachel's voice came crisp, composed. "Understood. Logging incident. Forwarding live feed to directors now. Do you want legal looped in?" Marcus's gaze swept the uniforms surrounding him, then settled back on the captain. "Yes," he said. "All of them." The captain stiffened, taken aback by the confidence. The flight attendant scoffed, arms crossed. "Who exactly do you think you're calling? You think your little phone stunt scares anyone?" But the cabin could hear Rachel's reply. "Board members James, Sarah, and David have been notified. Stand by." Gasps rolled down the rows. Phones zoomed closer. The security officer hesitated, eyes flicking from Marcus to the attendant, then back again. His grip on the radio strap loosened further. Mia stepped closer into the aisle, voice trembling but fierce. "Did you hear that? He has board members on the line. Maybe you should stop before this gets worse." The captain's jaw tightened. "This isn't how procedure works. He's bluffing." Marcus finally looked up, eyes steady, cutting through the noise. "If I were bluffing, Captain, you wouldn't be shaking." A murmur of, "Ooh," swept the cabin like a wave. The businessman in row 3 grinned, whispering to his phone camera. "He's got them cornered." Rachel's voice came again, firmer. "Marcus, confirmation received. They're monitoring live audio now. Do you want escalation to shareholder review?" The attendant's smirk faltered. "Shareholders?" she repeated, voice cracking slightly. Marcus didn't smile. He simply nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Proceed." The room shifted. Authority was no longer with the uniforms. It had slipped, unseen, into the hands of the man they'd tried to erase. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Rachel's voice still echoed faintly through the phone. Escalation confirmed. Board review active. Marcus lifted his eyes from the device, steady and unshaken. His gaze swept across the captain, the attendant, the officer, and then the passengers. Each phone raised, each lens hungry for truth. "You've spent the last 10 minutes calling me a fraud," Marcus said, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the cabin. "Tearing my ticket, threatening to drag me out. He let the silence stretch, every second a spotlight on the crew's trembling authority. Then he leaned back in seat 2 amperes, words deliberate, controlled. "My name is Marcus Carter, CEO of Carter Global, majority stakeholder in this airline." The air cracked. A collective gasp surged through the cabin. The captain froze, arms stiff at his sides. The attendant blinked rapidly, the smirk drained from her lips. The security officer's hand dropped entirely from his radio. Phone zoomed closer, catching every flicker of panic. From row 3, someone whispered, "He owns the airline?" Another voice responded louder, "He runs it. I've read about him." Mia's shoulders straightened, relief flooding her eyes. She nodded once, almost to herself. She had been right to speak. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't raise his tone. He simply let the truth land, heavy and undeniable. "I own 25% of this fleet," he continued. "Every plane, every route, every paycheck tied to my name, including yours." His eyes flicked toward the captain, including hers, a tilt of his head toward the attendant. "Including theirs." A glance at the security officers. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Authority had shifted entirely. The passengers erupted not in chaos, but in vindication. Applause, mutters of "unbelievable," laughter sharp with justice. Phones rose higher, capturing the reversal, the downfall. The captain's mouth opened, but no words came out. The attendant stepped back, as if distance could undo what had just been revealed. Marcus remained still, his voice the only steady anchor in the room. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is how you treated someone you thought didn't matter." Silence followed, heavy, irreversible. The storm had broken, and for the first time, the crew realized they were standing in the wreckage. The revelation detonated like thunder inside a pressurized cabin. The captain's arms, once folded in rigid defiance, fell uselessly to his sides. His jaw flexed, but the authority in his eyes was gone, replaced with something raw fear. He had barked orders at a man who signed his paychecks. The flight attendant, pale now, stumbled back a half step. The smug curve of her mouth collapsed into a tight line. She looked at the torn ticket pieces on the floor, then at the phones pointed directly at her, capturing her unraveling in high definition. The first officer's posture sagged, shoulders no longer squared. His eyes darted between Marcus and the captain, silently begging for direction that no longer existed. And the security officer, once ready to drag Marcus down the aisle, shifted his stance, radio dangling from a limp hand. He looked like a man suddenly aware he had nearly put his career on the line for someone else's prejudice. The passengers filled the silence. Applause erupted from row 3. A man shouted, "We've got it all on video." His companion turned her phone outward, showing the red recording light to everyone nearby, proof glowing like a beacon. In row 5, the teenage boy grinned wide, whispering, "Mom, he's the boss." They tried to throw out the boss. His mother didn't hush him this time. She nodded, lips pressed together, pride flashing in her eyes for a stranger she'd never met. Mia, the trainee, stood taller now, trembling less. She glanced toward Marcus, and for the first time that flight, she allowed herself a small, firm smile. She had spoken truth when it counted. The attendant caught her expression and hissed under her breath, "You're finished." But Mia didn't look away. "No," she whispered back, voice barely audible over the rising noise. "You are." How? Phones tilted closer, zooming on faces drained of color. The internet was already waiting, every gasp, every denial, every reversal captured in real time. Marcus sat unmoving, his calm now the gravitational center of the cabin. Around him, careers crumbled, reputations shattered, authority dissolved. He didn't need to lift a finger. The room had flipped itself. And as the applause grew, as whispers turned to chants of justice and unbelievable, one truth became undeniable. The flight crew no longer commanded the cabin. The passengers did. Marcus remained the only one seated in perfect stillness, the eye of a storm that had finally changed direction. The storm had already broken. Now came the judgment. Marcus lifted his phone again, not hurried, not flustered, measured. "Rachel," he said, voice steady, carrying through the hushed cabin. "Terminate the captain, the lead attendant, and the first officer. Effective immediately." Every head snapped toward him. Passengers gasped. The crew froze. Rachel's reply was calm, professional, merciless. "Processing now. Access clearance revoked. Flight crew credentials locked. Confirmed." At that exact moment, the captain's badge clipped neatly to his chest flashed red. A shrill tone emitted, signaling deactivation. He stared at it in disbelief, tapping the plastic as if it might wake back up. The attendant fumbled at her lanyard, swiping at the air, but her ID screen blinked, access denied. Her face drained of color, eyes wide, panic setting in. The first officer pulled his phone from his pocket, tried to open the airline app. The screen flashed the same cold denial. User not recognized. His shoulders sagged like a man watching his life collapse in real time. Passengers erupted, some clapping, some shouting. "He fired them right here!" someone yelled, laughter mixing with awe. Phones zoomed in on badges, on pale faces, on justice delivered without a single shout. The security officer took a step back, palms raised slightly as if surrendering. His eyes flicked between Marcus and the now locked crew, then he slowly unclipped his radio, placing it gently on an empty seat. He wasn't going down with them. Mia stood stunned but not afraid. Her jaw dropped as the reality settled. She had just witnessed the system flip on itself in minutes. The attendant finally found her voice, shaky and cracked. You can't do this." Marcus looked up at her, his tone calm but final. "I already did." The cabin roared. Applause thundered through the rows, mixed with laughter, disbelief, relief. The balance of power had not only shifted, it had been obliterated. The crew who had torn a ticket, spat insults, and wielded authority now stood stripped, powerless in the very cabin they thought they controlled. Marcus remained seated, centered, untouchable. Justice had been served, quietly and completely. The cabin was electric, alive with disbelief and vindication. The same rows that had once turned silent now buzzed with applause, with cheers, with the clicking of cameras capturing history at 35,000 feet. Marcus waited for it to crest, then raised a hand. Just one. The sound softened. Phone steadied. Eyes returned to him. He leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on his knees, voice calm but carrying. "The problem was never that you didn't know who I was," he said. "The problem was how you treated someone you thought didn't matter." The words struck deeper than any announcement over the intercom. Passengers nodded, some whispering, "Exactly." A man in the aisle seat muttered, "That's the truth right there." Marcus continued, gaze sweeping across the broken crew, then landing on the rows of witnesses. "Today you saw what happens when power hides behind uniforms and forgets dignity. You also saw what happens when silence refuses to bow." Mia, standing near the galley, blinked hard to hold back tears. She had found her courage, and it had mattered. The attendant trembled, clinging to her useless badge. The captain stood rigid, jaw locked, face pale as marble. Their authority was gone. But Marcus didn't linger on them. His words weren't for the guilty. They were for everyone else. "Remember this," he said, steady and final. "Respect is not reserved for titles or clothes or appearances. It belongs to every human being who walks into this cabin, this hotel, this office, this world. And the day you forget that is the day you lose more than a job." Silence followed, not of fear, but of weight, the kind of silence that lingers long after words are spoken. Then the applause returned, louder, stronger. Passengers stood, some clapping above their heads, some calling his name. Phones captured not just a scandal, but a statement. Marcus leaned back into seat 2 amperes, his rightful place. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. Calm once again. The storm was over, but its lesson would echo far beyond this flight. No shouting, no spectacle, just truth, delivered with the quiet force of a man who knew exactly who he was. And as the cameras rolled, one line etched itself into memory, into headlines, into history. "I don't need to record justice, I am the result of it."